He who cannot be alone is incapable of greatness. Why did some of history's brightest minds choose silence over applause? What leads someone to prefer the echo of their own conscience to society's constant murmur? Could it be that solitude is, at bottom, a kind of lucidity too painful for those who still dream of belonging? Solitude is the lot of all exceptional spirits. Arthur Schopenhauer. A man is himself only when he is alone, also his. But are we truly prepared to hear what we are when we step away from all the voices that mold us? At some point, everyone fears abandonment. We seek to be surrounded, understood, validated. Yet there is a peculiar group of people, often seen as strange, cold, or socially awkward, who not only accept solitude, they choose it. Have you ever felt that way? As if the noise of the world were an unbearable buzz that drowns out. As if deep down, what truly does you feel is the silence of a dawn when no one expects anything. Only you, with all your abysses. Schopenhauer didn't avoid the world because he was fragile. He avoided it because he was losing. And it's that lucidity that leads him right up to the edge of sanity, or perhaps beyond. Prepared to hear what you probably already felt, but never had the courage to say it out. This isn't about isolation. It's about freedom. It isn't about pretending. It's about seeing too much, so deeply, that the world begins to look unbearably superficial. Have you noticed how some intelligent people seem to carry a strange silence in their eyes? It isn't arrogance or contempt. It's as if they're elsewhere. Though present, something in them has already gone. It's a kind of voluntary exile, not from the physical world, but from the illusion. These rare, unsettling, intense people don't run from solitude. They choose it. And that isn't an escape. It's a sign, a symptom of something most don't perceive. An intelligence that has grown too deep for the superficial noise of ordinary coexistence. Schopenhauer saw it before anyone. He wrote, "Solitude is the destiny of all great souls." But what he didn't say, and perhaps only whispered to his diary or to his own mind, is that solitude is also the price. The price of seeing the world as it really is, bare, raw, without the adornments people use to keep waking up every day. The truth is that thinking too much hurts, and thinking with depth hurts even more. A time comes when you can no longer speak lightly, laugh without sensing the abyss, be with people without noticing the choreographed rehearsal of every smile. You begin to feel the weight of unspoken words, the calculation of intentions, the exhaustion of having to exist as expected and not as you are. That's why many choose silence. And silence becomes a temple, a place without performance, where you don't have to laugh when you don't want to, or feign interest in empty conversations about nothing that truly matters. Here's the first shock. While most associate solitude with lifelessness, intelligent people perceive it as a return to origin, a cleansing of the mind, a realignment with what is authentic. They don't withdraw out of antipathy. They retreat out of lucidity, because they've already understood that most social encounters are disguised transactions. Affection for acceptance, presence for validation, company for conformity. There is a pain only intelligence experiences, realizing that even feelings can be socially manipulated. Happiness, sadness, love, guilt. Everything can be scripted and dispensed in small, digestible doses. And when you see that too clearly, how do you keep living in the theater without feeling like an imposter? That's why, when intelligence awakens, it tends towards silence. And that silence isn't empty. It's full of thoughts no one hears, reflections that won't fit into bar talk, dilemmas that would make others call you intense, dramatic, or worse, pretentious. It's none of that. It's merely the side effect of seeing too much, feeling too much, thinking too much. If you've ever felt this way, know this. You're not broken, you're awake. Schopenhauer, who spent much of his life in seclusion, didn't see it as tragedy, but as necessity. He understood that authentic thinking needs spaces ordinary life doesn't offer. How can you write something true if you're always molding yourself to others' expectations? How can you be creative if your mind is busy fitting in? The most original minds in history, from Newton to Nietzsche, from Kafka to Pessoa, always had this ambiguous relationship with the world, and all of them, in some way, sense that constant contact with others dilutes thought. Thinking requires deviation, it requires silence, it requires time with one's own chaos. And here's the darkest revelation. The more you develop your intelligence, the harder it becomes to find interlocutors. Not because you're better, but because your quest is different. You don't want only to be heard, you want to be understood. You want to touch the other in a place they may never have visited. Most people run from that place. They want comfort, not depth. Entertainment, not confrontation. Lightness, not complexity. So the intelligent go quiet, and in the absence of exchange, they build dwellings within themselves. They invent worlds, ideas, narratives, and live there. Not as escape, but as resistance. Resistance to the vulgarization of existence, the pasteurization of the mind, the hollowing of feeling. Of course it hurts, but it is fertile pain, the very pain that precedes creation, that turns noise into music, chaos into art, thought into revelation. In this light, solitude ceases to be punishment. It becomes a laboratory, a sanctuary, a battlefield where the mind can finally breathe. And perhaps the most terrifying thing isn't being alone, but realizing that once you taste this lucid solitude, it's nearly impossible to go back. Now there's something you need to understand. The most dangerous enemy isn't outside, it's in your mind. That impulse that makes you explode, that anxiety that paralyzes you, that emotional attachment that weakens you from within, all of it follows a pattern. And unless you restructure the mental model that generates it, it will repeat again and again. There is, however, a way to change that foundation with cold logic, strategic awareness, and exercises in emotional retraining. We recorded a video showing how to apply that method in practice. You can watch it right now. Just scan the code on the screen or click the link in the description or in the first pinned comment. Thinking for yourself may at first seem an innocuous virtue, a noble, even admirable gesture. It only seems so because truly thinking for yourself is an act of rupture, a cut. It's stepping outside the herd and accepting the solitude that follows that choice. Schopenhauer didn't just understand this. He lived it to the end and paid the price. He was ignored by academia, ridiculed by his contemporaries, despised by devotees of optimism. While Hegel filled lecture halls with complex discourses on reason and progress, Schopenhauer wrote in silence about pain, illusion, and failure, and was set aside for it. But he didn't shut up, because there was something more valuable than applause, the integrity of a thought that doesn't bend. And here begins the question that gnaws at us. How many of us really think for ourselves? How many aren't merely reproducing borrowed ideas, reading what's in fashion, feeling what the group expects, believing what comes prepackaged? Most don't realize it, but they live as extensions of the collective mind. It's comfortable, warm, safe, and the end of authentic consciousness. Schopenhauer looked at humanity like someone watching a theater where everyone acts unknowingly. And on realizing this, he stepped back. Not out of disdain, but lucidity. The deeper he went into himself, the more he understood that thinking freely is like facing a mirror no one else dares to look into. The mirror of naked consciousness. And that mirror doesn't forgive. In it, you don't just see the world as it is. You see yourself as you are, without masks, without excuses, without applause. That's why free thinking hurts. Because when you start to question what everyone accepts, you stop belonging. People don't know what to do with someone who doesn't repeat the same mantras, Whoever thinks too much unsettles. They're unpredictable, dangerous. Schopenhauer knew it. He said that the ordinary person doesn't want truth. They want comfort, distraction, promises, hope. The free mind seeks the opposite, to see what is, even if it destroys every illusion. Living as he did requires courage. The courage to say, I prefer uncomfortable truth to comforting lies. I'd rather be alone with my conscience than surrounded by empty applause. But have you tried living that way? Have you followed your own thought wherever it leads? Even if it meant going against everything you learned, everything you were taught, everything expected of you. It's terrifying because you discover that thinking for yourself distances you not only from others, but from who you thought you were. Maybe that's why most prefer to stay asleep. Independent thought is a kind of exile. You lose the common language. Jokes stop being funny, conversations become tedious, superficial relationships unbearable. Here solitude reappears, not as choice but as consequence. Deep thinking isolates you, but it also frees you. Schopenhauer wrote that the greatest wisdom is to endure solitude. And that doesn't mean accepting an absence of company. It means bearing the consequence of being free. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's thinking as no one else thinks and enduring the silence that follows. In The World as Will and Representation, he destroys the idea that humans are rational by nature. For him, we are driven by a blind, irrational will that uses reason as a disguise. In other words, we aren't free. We are creatures trying to justify what we feel with borrowed thoughts. That's why most hate anyone who thinks differently. It threatens their justifications, strips away the veil, exposes the nothing beneath. Have you felt it? Have you noticed how, when you voice a harsher, more skeptical, more honest view, people pull away? You become negative, depressive, difficult. But no one asks, what if that view is true? What if the one who keeps silent is the only lucid one? Schopenhauer knew that authentic thinking requires enduring incomprehension, and that at the limit, the free mind will always seem strange because it is solitary. Yet that's the dark beauty of thought. It may leave you alone, but it also makes you whole. And there is a kind of peace you find only after ripping off every mask, the peace that depends on no one, that needs no audience, approval, or labels. It's the peace of knowing your conscience is your only home, and that even if everyone abandons you, you'll never again be hostage to a thought that isn't yours. Being alone is easy. The hard part is being alone without getting lost. There's a witnessless moment when the world goes quiet, and all that remains is you. No notifications, no external gaze, no weekend plans, only the sound of your breath and a question that advances slowly, like someone walking in fear through the dark. Who am I with no one near? Most run from this. They flee the void like a monster, because in the void there are no distractions, no reflections, no masks to shield us from ourselves. But there is a small group who not only bear the void, they seek it, not out of masochism, but because they understood something that changes everything. The void isn't the end, it's the portal. Schopenhauer called it the art of being alone, without being empty. This isn't the loneliness that sickens, it's the solitude that reveals. The difference is subtle and brutal. Being alone because of rejection is suffering. Being alone by choice is initiation. The problem is that pain comes first because no one teaches us to be alone. No one prepares us for the deep silence of an unnoisy mind. So when it arrives, it looks like a collapse, a fall, as if something were wrong. It isn't. You've simply arrived at a place few dare to explore, unmasked interiority. In that inner landscape, consciousness begins to reorganize itself. First discomfort, then familiarity. And if you have the courage to stay, lucidity. Schopenhauer knew that when the mind isn't fed by the presence of others, it begins to generate life of its own. So he silently created a whole universe of ideas while the outside world ignored him. He walked for hours, wrote relentlessly, meditated on the will as the essence of being. He didn't seek relief, he sought clarity. The void for him was philosophy's raw material. But can we be alone without breaking? Perhaps what we lack isn't company, but depth. For many are surrounded yet empty, while others are alone yet brimming. The true content of life doesn't come from outside, it wells up within. But within demands excavation, and digging properly is the work of few. Have you ever spent an entire night with yourself, without distractions, music, screens, just your thoughts? It's brutal, revealing. You begin to hear inner voices that never had space, fears always silenced, desires you hid even from yourself. Here's the point. Most call it madness, but perhaps it's simply consciousness. Because the deeper you go, the more you understand that being alone is, in truth, being complete. There's no fragmentation when you fully inhabit yourself. No lack when you're enough for yourself. No panic in silence, when silence becomes a friend. Yes, it's scary. We were trained to equate presence with worth. If no one is with you, something's wrong. If there are no messages, there's no love. If there's no attention, you don't exist. But what if it's the other way around? What if true worth lies precisely in the absence of noise? What if the deepest love is born from meeting your own shadow? What if existence happens in silence, not in performance? Schopenhauer spoke of cultivating the spirit as an inner garden, far from noise, the crowd, the constant need to be seen. To tend that garden, you must be alone. You must dirty your hands with the soil of your own psyche, face the thorns, bleed a little. Then flowers bloom that no one else can give. Flowers born from the chaos you were able to endure. Flowers that only grow in abandoned ground. The art of being alone without getting lost isn't a talent. It's a conquest, a form of inner mastery, a maturity that is born only when you stop looking for yourself in others and begin to build yourself within. That doesn't mean rejecting the world. On the contrary, it prepares you to meet it more fully. Whoever doesn't need anyone can love freely. Whoever has already found themselves can be truly present. The void stops being a hole and becomes a mirror. And in the reflection, you no longer see absence. You see potential, creation. You see yourself whole for the first time. They don't shout, protest in the streets, make noise, release incendiary manifestos, or spit truths on social media like people begging for digital applause. The rebellion of these people is silent, invisible, almost imperceptible, and therefore more powerful. They rebel with the mind. And perhaps that's why they are so dangerous to the system. Schopenhauer understood early that whoever thinks too much never quite belongs. Not because they can't, but because they're no longer willing to trade lucidity for a seat at the table. These people reject the rules of a game where everyone pretends to believe the same things, just to avoid feeling the weight of the void. But the solitary rebel doesn't run from the void. They face it. In that act, their insurrection has already begun. The world doesn't fear the one who screams. It fears the one who observes in silence. The silent one is processing, digesting, drawing secret maps of meaning. Far from the bustle, far from opinion currents, far from collective delusion. The solitary's rebellion isn't against others. It's against the ideas that mold us without consent. It's against the obligation to smile when you're in ruins. Against the dictatorship of lightness, productivity, programmed happiness. They're dangerous because they can't be bought. They don't depend. They don't need a stage. And above all, because they think outside permitted languages. The world loves free thinkers until they think something truly free. Schopenhauer wrote as someone who knew no one would understand and wrote anyway. That is one of the greatest acts of resistance. Keep thinking even when there's no audience. Keep diving into questions that earn no likes, rewards, or belonging. Keep digging for meaning amid absurdity, like someone digging a well in a desert, thirsty and faithful. The solitary rebel won't give up truth, even when it distances them from everything. They know some ideas once thought have no return. You can no longer believe what you believed. You can't laugh at the same jokes, desire the same objects, follow the same rituals. The ordinary world becomes intolerable. It hurts, but liberates. After all, how many live, repeating inherited thoughts, bottled beliefs, slogans that sound like ideas but are just background noise? The solitary rebel refuses that. They want the source, the bone, the invisible structure behind reality. And to reach it, they must step back. Not as abandonment, but as preparation for the leap. This rebellion has a high cost because it brings not recognition, but silence, strangeness. You become the odd one in the group, the misfit at dinner, the one who thinks too much, feels deeply, questions what no one dares touch. Perhaps that's the path's beauty. You stop seeking the company of those who only fill time and start desiring the company of those who expand the soul. And while that company hasn't arrived, you learn to suffice for yourself. Schopenhauer said the more intelligent the person, the more they suffer. Not with melancholy, but with clarity, because seeing too much burns. Many prefer darkness. It cradles, protects, numbs. Those who refuse anesthesia awaken. An awaking being, even alone, carries the potential to rattle the world's structures. They don't need to persuade anyone. It is enough to exist as they are, to think without censorship, to live without needing to make sense to others. In a world where everyone shouts to be validated, that is an insult. The solitary's rebellion happens in details, in refusing trends, in the unsaid, in the silence during a superficial conversation, in the gaze that pierces the veil of the banal, in choosing not to be where everyone is, after understanding that the price of presence is sometimes the death of authenticity. They aren't superior, but they are dangerously authentic. And that alone destabilizes any system based on repetition, conformity, and lies. So the world tries to domesticate the solitary. It says they have problems, need to socialize more, are overthinking, must return to reality. What no one understands is that they may have gone too far to come back. They chose to live with eyes open, and now they see too much to live asleep. Few speak of this, but there's something deeply frightening about being truly free. Frightening because being free inevitably means being alone. Not the romantic solitude of Sunday afternoons or introspective coffees, the solitude of no longer belonging. Schopenhauer knew this. He knew true freedom isn't a shout of independence, but a silence that separates you from the world. It's the moment you wake up and realize the crowd, however warm, however welcoming, is dreaming a collective dream you no longer share. And the most terrible thing, no one will pull you out. You must choose to leave. Leaving the crowd isn't only rejecting others' company, it's rejecting prefabricated ideas, automatic smiles, imposed goals, and desires planted in you as if they were yours when they never were. It's rejecting the logic of performance, of success that empties, of pleasure that numbs, of morality that serves order more than truth. That is devastating because in freeing yourself, you also lose. You lose common ground, the language of superficial coexistence, the ease of quick answers. Freedom, when it truly arrives, tears you from illusion with cold hands. And then you see the absurdity of social rituals, the endlessness of petty disputes, how much life is made of unconscious repetition, rehearsed noise, masks that no longer even stick to the face. You can't pretend. You can't smile to please. You can't remain in conversations where everything has been said 1,000 times and nothing has truly been felt. Schopenhauer called this the courage to live without the comfort of illusion. This kind of courage is rare. Most prefer the comfort of a shared lie to the pain of solitary truth. Those who dare leave the crowd, not out of hate, but out of exhaustion. They stop fighting to belong, stop adapting, stop trying to convince others. They simply stop. There begins real freedom, not the freedom to come and go, but the freedom to no longer need to be understood, to not depend on approval, to no longer want to play the game. That freedom is frightening because there's no return. You can't put on the old clothes. You can't rejoin groups where everything revolves around mutual validation. You can't pretend it still makes sense. The world now seems small. Predictable conversations, conditional relationships, love full of unspoken contracts. You realize you were a prisoner of a theater, and now you're free but naked. That's the price of freedom. Nakedness. The radical vulnerability of being yourself, without shield, script, or crowd to soften your existence. That's why the intelligent step back. They need space to breathe off stage. They think too much to fit into frames. They feel too much to go numb again. The cruelest part, even free, they still love, still care, still desire connection. But now they can only live bonds that respect the soul. Those are rare, so rare that sometimes solitude feels more honest. Have you lived this? Looked around and thought, no one sees me. Not in a narcissistic sense, but a spiritual one. Like your soul is speaking on another frequency and no one hears. That's why the intelligent leave the crowd. They see too much, and feeling too much in this world is like having bare skin in a cutting wind. Everything hurts, leaves a mark, demands more strength than it should. Schopenhauer said superior men are inevitably melancholic. Perhaps that melancholy is mourning for the impossibility of sleeping again. When you truly wake up, the world changes color. There's no room for trivial distractions, conditional caresses, parties where everyone dances to avoid thinking. You don't hate anyone, but you can't stay. Freedom pushed you out. Now it's just you and your conscience. But there's beauty in that. The beauty of not selling yourself, not deluding yourself, walking on without applause, thinking what no one thinks, creating in the dark, loving with presence, existing with dignity, even when unseen. In the end, the freedom that frightens is the freedom that saves. It tears you from the crowd so you can find yourself. And perhaps, just perhaps, one day in the silence, you'll meet another solitary one. That meeting, without demands, neediness, molds, that will be truly human. Maybe it's not about loneliness. Maybe it never was. Maybe what scares people about those who choose to be alone isn't that they step away, but that they don't need to come back. Because deep down, we all feel there's something strange in that unending need to belong, that desperate urge to be accepted, heard, answered, remembered. Something there smells like fear. Fear of what? Of hearing your own mind without others' noise? Of facing desires that don't fit on Instagram? Of discovering that the life you live is merely the repetition of choices that were never yours? Schopenhauer wasn't the first to withdraw. Before him came other mystics, poets, madmen, men and women who silently decided that truth is worth more than comfort, and that freedom doesn't need to be shouted. It stands by itself like a rock. These people unsettle us because while the world strains to appear functional, they seem broken, perhaps because they are too whole to function in a system made of halves. You see them on the subway, in the corner of the classroom, walking alone at dusk. They carry books like shields, gazes like questions, and a disquieting peace, as if they know something you don't yet grasp. Maybe they do. Maybe they discovered that being alone isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of oneself. That thinking differently isn't arrogance. It's survival. And that leaving the crowd isn't isolation, it's maturity. call them weird, difficult, distant, but deep down you envy them a little because you sense, even if you won't admit it, that there's a secret courage in those who prefer lucidity to mere belonging, and a rare kind of beauty, trembling, intimate, honest, in those who choose to be free, even if it costs them everything. I'll leave you with a question, not to be answered, but to resonate where only you can hear. What if what you most fear to feel is actually the door to who you really are? If you made it this far, it's because something in you also chose silence. Maybe not completely, maybe still wrestling with it, one foot in the world and the other over the abyss. But something in you recognized the call. I need to tell you something. This video, this long whisper that crossed the night, was born on a night when I couldn't sleep. Not from physical insomnia, but from excess lucidity. You know those nights when your head won't quiet down? When you realize you're tired, not in the body, but tired of pretending. That night I remembered an old scene. I must have been about 17. At a family lunch full of repeated conversations, recycled jokes, expectations floating in the air like cigarette smoke, I suddenly stood up, went outside, sat on the patio floor, and began writing on the back of a napkin. Something strange, almost without punctuation, about how unreal it all felt, as if the world were on a stage and I'd lost the script. That day I thought something was wrong with me. Today I understand. It was just my mind trying to breathe, trying to exist outside the script. So if at any point in this video you felt understood, even uncomfortably, know that this space is yours too. This channel is more than philosophy. It's a refuge for those tired of pretending everything's fine, a mirror for those who think too much, a corner for those who prefer the weight of truth to the lightness of lies. Thank you for trusting your time, your attention, and especially your mind. It's rare, valuable, and I don't take it for granted. If you want to know how others achieve that steady mind that nothing and no one can topple, click the link in the description or the first pinned comment. The content is available for a limited time. And now comes the moment that separates free thinkers from those who only hit play without paying attention. If this video made you feel anything, discomfort, relief, anger, recognition, comment below. You don't need to write a philosophical treatise, unless you want to, of course. One word is enough, a symbol, a silence. Sometimes me too is all we need to hear, even from a stranger. Like the video if it shook you in any way. And if it didn't, you're still too comfortable. Watch it again and subscribe, creature. Seriously, you've gone through 5 chapters, plunged into Schopenhauer's mind, looked into the mirror of your solitude, and you still haven't subscribed? What are you waiting for? The reincarnation of Nietzsche? As for these 2 videos on the screen now, I won't tell you the topic, but here's a warning. One of them will make you question a certainty you've carried for years. The other may lead you to an answer you're not yet brave enough to accept. Choose carefully or don't. See you in the next immersion or not. But if you come back whole, come back lucid, come back as someone who's tired of belonging,